Okay. So welcome everyone to this Q&A. This week's Q&A is with Matthew Sharpe. Matthew Sharpe is the author of 5 novels and 2 collections of short stories. He's taught in the graduate writing programs at Columbus University and Bard College and the undergrad programs at Wesleyan, Columbia and the Pratt Institute. He's now a full-time editor and writing coach. So welcome, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Louise, for having me.
Matthew, the first question I have for you is, what exact steps did you take to become a novel editor from graduation to your present job?
The first thing I did was to get a job in the production department at Us magazine, the celebrity gossip magazine. And the reason I gravitated toward production instead of editorial is that my first aspiration was to be a writer of novels and short stories. And my logic then was that I didn't want to spend all day working with words and then try to go home and also work with words. So for maybe a half a dozen years or more, I sustained myself by doing production work in various magazines. I also worked at Condé Nast Traveler and at Self magazine. I eventually, about 5 years after graduating from college, I enrolled in an MFA program at Columbia in New York and took 2.5 years to get my master's degree in fiction writing. All of which time I was still working in production departments at magazines, but then my work-study job in graduate school was teaching writing to kids in public schools in New York City. When I published my first book about 5 years after graduating from graduate school, I then got a job teaching undergrad at Columbia. And I then continued to teach writing at the college level, even while I was also teaching kids how to write. And I eventually, when I was still single and did not have children, I quit one of my university jobs because I had enough income from my books to sustain me for a while. And I wanted to see what would happen if I just had all the time in the world to write. And the answer is I wrote about the same amount of time as when I was trying to fit it into the margins. And then the stock market crash happened in 2008. And then all my book income dried up, and I figured very quickly I'd better figure out how to make a living. And so I had all these students coming back to me after they had graduated, or I would meet writers, grown-up writers at writers' conferences saying, could you work with me independently on my novel? And so I thought, oh, okay, maybe there's a business to be had in that. And so I began networking and parlayed my skills that I had learned as a teacher of creative writing into being an editor of novels. And because I was hungry for business and needing clients, people would come to me with business book ideas or self-help book ideas, and I just wouldn't turn them down. I subsequently learned that a lot of people who've come to this work through having been an in-house editor at Random House or one of the other major publishers, they all had these very narrow areas of specialization. Like, I only edit romance novels that take place in Galveston, Texas from 1925 to 1927. And I couldn't afford to do that. So I became maybe, with a little bit of bravado, I became a jack of all trades and just decided, I will edit. I know what a good sentence is. I know what a good argument is. I know what a good story is. I can help people write books in any genres. And so I would, of course, read in the genres that I was helping people write their books in, to kind of understand what the conventions were. So that's how I became the man I am today.
Obviously, I have so many questions about your editing, but I'd just like to take it back to something that you said in the beginning. You mentioned that your first job, you were working for Us Weekly, the kind of gossip magazine. Mm-hmm. Many of our students are interested in working for magazines and gaining writing experience like that. So do you have any kind of tips for them as to how they might begin on the ladder with, like, a, kind of writing for magazines and things like that?
I mean, the magazine ecosystem is very, very different from when I graduated from college. It just doesn't. These were all paper magazines that I worked for, and I think there are such things still exist, but they are few and far between, and they are harder to get work for, and they don't pay as well. I think just start. Uh, you know, my belief is you should always be paid for your writing, if at all possible. Send your clips to magazines that or websites that pay at least something, and aim high, and also recognize that a lot of other people are aiming high too. But just start writing stories. Start finding what interests you and writing about it, and send your writing to editors. And if you can find that young, hungry editor who's just working their way up the masthead at a magazine or at a website, those are the people who will become your allies, and with whom you will rise through the ranks.
Did you have clips when you applied to your post at Us Weekly? Do you remember?
No, because I wasn't in the editorial department. I was in the production
Oh,
department.
yeah, you
Uh,
said.
yeah, so I was really helping put the physical magazine together, and I had zero experience. I was lucky enough to have a friend who worked at the sister magazine Rolling Stone, and he helped me get a job at Us Magazine. And I would list the skills that I or list the job duties that I had there, but they are all obsolete, and nobody would know what I was talking about.
Would you recommend it as a viable path now for people who are looking to get into publishing? Would you recommend that they apply for any sort of job, say, production or design, even if they kind of want to write and edit?
I think if your goal really is, particularly if your goal is to edit, then get an editing job. Even get an internship. Ideally, your internship will pay something, but in the reality of the world, they don't all pay. But if you can afford to have a non-paying internship or a low-paying internship, by all means, just hustle. And the other thing I want to say is, I think my career path illustrates that there's not, you needn't take the conventional path. Whatever you need to do to survive economically, and if you have any obligations to other people economically, by all means, you need to take care of yourself and those people, but also leave time in your life for following your passion and doing work that is meaningful and valuable to you. It'll feed your soul, and that's hugely important.
So what does a typical day in your job look like, Matthew?
Well, I now have a wife and two kids. And so if I want to get any writing done of my own, I tend to wake up before they do. So I usually wake up around 4:30 or 5 in the morning, make myself a cup of coffee, I feed the pets, and then I write for as much time as there is until the next person wakes up and needs something. So that's usually about 2 hours. So that's mat writing time. So if you aspire to write, fit it in wherever you can. Don't be precious about it. If you're tired, do it anyway. If you're cranky, do it anyway. If you have COVID, do it anyway. Make a promise to yourself. Make a promise to that wild part of yourself, that where the writing comes from, and keep that promise. And the wild part will show up more and more and become your ally. And then I, make the breakfasts and the lunches, and get the kids to school. And then I have an office about 15 minutes away from my house, just a little room where I am now. And I come here and I start whatever the day's editing is. Yeah, or phone calls with coaching clients.
So what sort of editing do you get in a day? What might be a kind of typical workload for you?
So today, for example, I will be mostly just having quiet editing time, working on a novel of a relatively new client. And then I will also be helping one of my coaching clients. I have a client with whom I'm working on a business book. And so today I will be going through that collaboration. Typically looks like once or twice a week, she and I have an hour-long phone conversation where we brainstorm. And right now we're trying to create a proposal for her book. And we will take the proposal, once the proposal is written, we will then shop it around to agents, and the agent will sell it to a publisher, and then the publisher, on the strength of the proposal, will pay the client, the author, what's called an advance against royalties. They'll pay them a lump sum upfront, which will basically fund the writing of the book, and then she and I will work on the writing of the book and eventually turn in a completed manuscript. So today, there's no phone call today, but today I'm going through transcripts of previous phone calls and trying to pull out what I think are the stories that most illustrate her core concepts that she wants to convey in her business book. So my two tasks today are culling stories from transcripts and page by page editing of this novel.
So how do you go about page by page editing? What's your process?
It varies depending on what the author wants and how much love the manuscript needs. This is what I'll say about writing a novel. I think we all watch lots of movies and TV shows, and you can be lulled into this idea that writing a novel is not that much different from writing a screenplay or a teleplay. And so one of the fundamental pieces of advice I have for my writing clients is, when you are writing the novel, not only are you the script writer, you are also all the actors and the director and the art director and the cinematographer and the props person and the location scout. You have to basically build an entire world in the mind of your reader. And of course, you don't have to build the entire world. You have to select the details of that world that will allow the reader to infer the world in their imaginations. I mean, when you think about it, it's an extraordinary thing, this business of reading. There's this white page, this white kind of rectangle, and on it are these little black squiggles of code, and the writer decodes the black squiggles and turns it into a world in their head. I mean, that's miraculous to me. And so the writer's job is to give them enough code where that world comes to life in their minds. So my job as a editor is to make sure that there's enough code there.
So what are the things that might make kind of bad code? You know, like what are the things that if you see a novel and you're editing it, you think, you know, what are the kind of worst things someone can have in there for you?
There's so many different things. Go clean your room. Her mother yelled at her, or her mother admonished her. Well, I think if the dialogue says "go clean your room," then you don't have to say that the mother admonished her. We know it's admonishing. So I guess overwriting would be giving the reader too much information, or I don't know. What would be another example? She was a beautiful woman and her smile made the room light up. So two problems there. One is that beauty is, the word beautiful is not something you can see, hear, smell, touch, taste. And her smile made the room light up is a cliche. And so you need to give readers sensory information that they can convert in their minds into something they can see, hear, smell, touch, and taste. And if you give them cliches, they will populate your world with the cliches that you have given them. And there's this really interesting concept by this Russian critic named Viktor Shklovsky called defamiliarization. And defamiliarization means that you can show the most ordinary thing to your readers. You can show somebody getting on the subway and taking the commute to work, but if you show it to them with a lively choice of words and perceptions, it becomes fresh and new for them, so they're not perceiving it in their habitual way. You're kind of breaking habits of perception by choosing and using fresh language and original language.
That's fascinating, and I think really, really helpful, especially for students who are looking. I mean, I have a lot of creative writers on the course, so thank you so much for those tips. That really is wonderful. My next question is kind of a general one. Is editing fiction harder to get into than other types of editing, would you say?
I think if you're again, my path to becoming an independent editor is unconventional. And just to be clear, an independent editor means that I do not work for directly for a publishing company. I am hired by publishing companies to clean up a manuscript or to work with an author who's on a tight deadline for a book, but I have my own shop. So if you're taking the conventional path where you get a job at a publishing house, which is a really interesting thing to do, and then you learn the business inside out. It is highly unlikely that you will be given a job where you just get to edit fiction. In fact, your entry level job probably will have very little editing in it at all. You will be managing contracts, getting coffee and filing papers for people, handling their correspondence. And then if you develop a rapport with your boss and you show them that you're, a reader and thoughtful, they may start giving you manuscripts to read and getting your feedback on those manuscripts. But there are very few editors out there who work exclusively on fiction. So my advice would be read broadly in lots of different genres, even genres that you might find distasteful or don't have a natural magnetism for, just to educate yourself about what's out there. Fiction is not the stuff that allows publishing houses to survive for the most part. It's the nonfiction books that are the big money makers on the whole for publishing houses, with some notable exceptions, like J.K. Rowling or Stephen King or somebody like that. But so it would behoove everybody in your course to understand what all the different genres are that are published, and really maybe dig into what sells, what are the top books, and how much revenue do they bring in for the publishing houses, and understand what they're likely to encounter when they become editors.
I think that many people think that novel editing is just about kind of looking at things like story development or character arcing or overall plot development. Would you dispel that myth? Would you say actually it's more about being a good copy editor in the beginning and then learning how to line edit and then doing those bigger things? Or what's your kind of take on that? What do you think are the most important skills to have?
I think you need the whole skill set. I mean, a publisher, a larger publisher, typically has a copy editing department. So the stuff about language and usage and getting all the punctuation in the right spot is handled by somebody in that department. But if you're going to be a good editor, novels are made out of sentences. Those are the bricks of the novel. You need to be able to put together a wall made out of bricks if you're going to be a really good editor. So it's all of the above. It's the sentences. I mean, I happen to be somebody who thinks that the sentence is the core element of a novel. So you have to know how to write a good sentence and edit a sentence into being a good sentence. And then, yes, all character arcs, understanding the relationship between story, plot, and character, dialogue, setting, pacing, all those things are considerations. And then there's this whole other world of considerations for an editor at a publishing house, which is the business side of things. And editors need to be pretty shrewd business people in order to survive in the business. They have to know what's being published by all the other houses. They have to know what's doing well and what's not. And they need to be, and then the so-called soft skills, the relationship skills are hugely important. Make friends with other editors, make friends with writers, make friends with agents, make friends with salespeople and marketing people. You're all collaborating on this project of publishing. So yeah, there's the part where you're actually sitting with the book in front of you, and that tends to be the part, because of the way I've set up my life, that I focus on. But then there's also the part where I'm hustling for new business, making connections with agents, making connections with editors, reading the various book reviews and finding out what's out there, finding out who's selling which manuscripts to which editor, so that I can recommend to my clients, you should try so and so and so and so as an agent.
I mean, you're a writing professor, so is this advice that you'd also give to students who are writing novels rather than just students who are looking to get into editing? Is it necessary if you're a writer to know the market inside and out, to know which genres are performing best, to know which agents want what?
It doesn't hurt to know it. I mean, I have this kind of purity aspect of my maybe ridiculously idealistic idea about the writing life too, which is that so many of the things you do in life are for other people, and that's probably a good thing. And ultimately, when you're writing, you're doing it for other people. But I think the way that you serve others best is by writing the thing that you're most passionate about and doing the best work that you can and setting high standards for yourself. But choosing the work that is most meaningful to you and doing that. So if that happens to be writing horror novels, then write horror novels your heart out. If it happens to be writing weird experimental novels, then do that. If it's writing far out experimental poetry, do that. If it's writing self-help books, do that. I really think people used to say to me, I tend to be in the sort of pretty psychological book novel category with a little bit, maybe a soupçon of experimentalism. And people would always say, but why don't you just write a couple of thrillers to make your reputation and get a bunch of money so you don't have to live in that tiny little apartment you're living in, and then write your pretty little books. And my answer was, because I don't know how to do that, because the people who do that love doing that and they're really good at it. And if I did it, I probably wouldn't be that good at it and my heart wouldn't be in it. So that's my answer.
Obviously, you've traversed your own very, I'm sure very challenging journey to becoming a published author. What would you say to writing students who, I mean, let's be honest, it's easy to become disillusioned with the publishing industry if you're a creative writer. You probably do believe that what's the point sending to agents? I'm never going to get picked up out of the slush pile. What would your advice be to people who are kind of thinking, what's the point? Because I'm never going to be that lucky one that gets picked up by an agent.
You certainly will not be that lucky one if you don't ever send your manuscript to agents. As they say in the lottery ads, you can't win it if you're not in it. And it is, yes, it can, you will almost inevitably face rejection. I have many times over. I had when I was a young guy starting out. This was before there were electronic submissions, believe it or not. So I would always, I began by writing short stories, and I would always have, once I completed a short story, I would have that short story in the mail to at least 7 magazines at all times. Each short story that I completed had to be in the mail to 7 magazines. And I had a big spreadsheet, and I would just track, this is the date that I sent it out. And if it came back, I would mark the date that it was rejected, and then I would send out another one, and so on and so forth. And that's how I began getting my stories published in literary magazines. And that led to, finally, there was a literary magazine that was well known enough that lots of agents and editors were reading it. And then I started getting phone calls from agents and editors who wanted to talk to me. But this took years. And I had a folder, because again, paper, that was about this wide. And then I had 2 folders and then 3 folders that were this wide with rejection slips. Again, paper. So I just and it was like a badge of honor for me to have them. It in some way helped me. It was like, there's this concept in forestry of the nurse log. The nurse log is the tree that falls over, and then other trees actually use it as mulch and sprout out of it. And so I was making a nurse log out of my own, rejection slips. It was mulch for the soil of my career.
It's nice to hear this side of things, because I think all too often when students go looking online for how did someone get published, they inevitably stumble across the kind of odd sensation story, the Stephanie Meyer, is it, Twilight, the person who happened to put their work on one thing and got an agent with no previous, short stories published. And I think that what's nice about hearing your story, Matthew, is that it really does show that, I mean, I imagine when you began your career, you didn't I imagine you had self-belief, but you probably never thought you stood any more chance than anyone else. I imagine you were always kind of realistic about your prospects, as it were.
No, I was really deluded about my prospects, and in some ways that helped me because I was so ridiculously pie in the sky. I thought, oh, this can't be that hard. I'm actually pretty good at this. That it just I just kept thinking that. I just kept thinking that. So I don't know. Maybe I do. It is a rough and tumble business, and once you graduate college, there's no professor out there waiting for your next short story. And if at all possible, you know, the French writer Albert Camus had this idea of the invincible summer that you keep in your soul, and if possible, keep that invincible summer somewhere inside yourself. That part of you that whatever it is, I think ultimately there's some mix of woundedness and love that we all bring to our art practice, to our writing practice. And don't worry, the woundedness will take care of itself, but keep that love alive, preserve it, do whatever you need to be kind to it and allow it to grow. Have good friendships, take care of the people in your life, be taken care of by them. Have a core of friends who are writers who support you and you support them. Keep that love alive. Keep that inviolable summer inviolable.
That's beautiful advice. That really is. I think I'll just end by asking, do you have any more advice or anything else maybe I haven't touched on, or anything else that you feel might be kind of relevant to talk about, whether it's to do with editing or writing fiction, or anything at all that I might not have covered in enough detail?
I don't know, for some reason I'm thinking of French writers today. The French writer Jean Cocteau said, whatever your audience hates, do more of it. So I guess maybe I would convert that into, don't forget to keep being weird. Being weird is okay. Being different is okay. In fact, it may start out feeling like, well, an editor may say, well, but I've never seen anything like this before. I don't know what to do with this. But eventually, that may be the thing that they crave because it's new and different. So don't forget to keep being weird.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I'm just going to stop the recording now. Thank you.